রোহিঙ্গা সংকট এবং পুনর্বাসনে করণীয় কি এই সংক্রান্ত একটি সেমিনার রাজধানীর রেডিসন ব্লুতে অনুষ্ঠিত হচ্ছে। সরাসরি চলে যাচ্ছি সেখানে আছেন শারমিন চৌধুরী।
Respected Chief Guest Dr. A.K. Abdul Momen MP, Honorable Minister, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Government of Bangladesh, distinguished guest speakers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. My name is Sharmin Choudhury, and I'm very glad to have this privilege to welcome you all in today's seminar on a very important issue, that is Rohingya crisis and repatriation, what is to be done. At the very outset, I would like to request Dr. Muhammad Farooq, Advisor, Diplomat Publications, for his address of welcome. Dr. Muhammad Farooq.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome today seminar on Rohingya crisis and repatriation. What is to be done? First of all, I would like to remember the father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, under whose leadership we have gained independence, and the 3 million martyrs who has given their life in 1971 in the liberation war of Bangladesh. Honorable Chief Guest, Dr. A.K. Abdul Momen, MP, Minister of Foreign Affairs, former Minister Abul Hassan Choudhury, respected keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Delwar Hussain, respected keynote speaker, Dr. Imtiaz Ahmed, foreign dignitaries, respected guests, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum. I want to welcome and thanks you all for being here with us today. We are very pleased to be able to welcome those of you that have been with us for a long time, now as well as those who are newly joined with this valuable event. We are presently here already know that the Rohingya crisis in Bangladesh is one of the fastest growing refugee crises in the world. And yet not everyone is aware of what exactly is happening to the Rohingya people. The recent influx of Rohingya refugees fleeing escalating violence in the Rakhine state since August 2017 has more than doubled the total refugee population in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is hosting over 1.1 million Rohingya in Cox's Bazar, Bashanchor, Bangladesh. Bangladesh is stressed beyond its capacity. Due to Rohingya influx, deforestation occurred that caused flash flood, land erosion, and regular fire incident in the camp areas. In fact, we have lost around 70% protected vegetation after 2017. Moreover, mistrust and grievances of local community over Rohingya are increasing day by day. The sooner of Rohingya are repatriated, the better both the Bangladesh and Myanmar. There are windows of opportunities for the international community to put pressure on Myanmar authorities to resolve the Rohingya crisis. And there is no other option but repatriation to resolve the crisis. Safe repatriation and end gender-based violence is most important to solve this Rohingya issue in Bangladesh. Our Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina MP, Mother of the Humanity, speaking at the ceremonial opening of the Paris Peace Forum said, quote, "The world must act seriously to make sure these people are back to Myanmar soon. Otherwise, the security risks from the crisis will not just remain confined within our border. We already see sign of that," unquote, end quote. Today, our keynote speaker and chief guest and other guests will discuss the concern of emergency and what steps should be taken into account on resettlement. Thank you everyone once again for joining this seminar today. Joy Bangla, Joy Bangabandhu, long live Bangladesh.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammad Farooq. Thank you very much. So as Dr. Mohammad Farooq was mentioning that we have two keynote speakers in our today's seminar. And at first, I would like to request Professor Dr. Delwar Hossain, Department of International Relations, University of Dhaka, to please present his paper.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The Honorable Chief Guest, Foreign Minister of People's Republic of Bangladesh, Honorable Moderator, distinguished fellow speakers, respected guests and participants, excellencies, friends from different embassies and foreign missions, and media, ladies and gentlemen, assalamu alaikum and very good morning. My presentation is not, titled in the invitation letter, but you can see from here, actually I am going to focus on the domestic aspect of Myanmar, because this is the crux of the problem that I think we need to focus, because this has remained a little bit unnoticed and underrepresented. And if you just follow the statement, the country became independent, that is Myanmar, in 1948, but still observers or analysts almost universally recognize that this country has neither known peace nor national unity and democracy. So it is a very different kind of country, and this country has developed a kind of domestic structure which is the core of understanding the cause and solutions to the Rohingya crisis. And that is the primary or kind of proposition that I have in my presentation. We know, this country has a long history, and I'm not going to deal with all aspects of history. The country became independent in 1948, but before that, in 1947, it signed a union treaty with different groups of communities. But at the same year, the country, Myanmar, got into civil war, into insurgency war. So, but still it continued some kind of representative democracy. And then we know what happened in 1962. Myanmar witnessed the military coup, and the military rule continued for long. And then in 1982, we know they introduced citizenship law, basically to exclude the Rohingyas to the rights to citizenship. And then we know about 1988, when there was an election, and that was denied by the military junta during that time. And Aung San Suu Kyi, who was the leader of NLD, National League for Democracy, she was arrested. And then the country suffered from sanctions and different domestic upheaval, unrest, but it continued with its rule of dictatorship. And also we know in 2011, the country partially opened, and the so-called hybrid kind of democracy started. But then that era also ended in 2021 February with a new coup in Myanmar, and that was actually unexpected and surprising, because the leader who was arrested by the regime was freed in 2010, and Myanmar was a bit country where we saw that US President Barack Obama and many Western leaders and regional leaders visited, and Myanmar was enjoying kind of cooperation. And Aung San Suu Kyi, who also supported the Myanmar regime, and also particularly we know about what she did in ICC, International Crime Tribunal, where she supported the genocide of the military junta. But that changed, and so I think, the 2020 elections, where actually NLD won in a big way, was the turning point. Now Myanmar is a new political landscape. But since we have very limited time, so I'll try to cover some of the highlights of internal and external dynamics of Myanmar. But if we want to understand what kind of state Myanmar is, of course, I mean, every state in the post-colonial era is struggling with the issue of state building and nation building. But Myanmar, we see that they could not resolve this issue. And still they are actually fighting to how to deal with the ethnic or ethnicity and nationalism. And this country is still in a transition from feudalism to modernism, and now we see globalization. So it is still at the very early stage of state building, and it has failed to create some basic political institutions to deal with domestic problems. Particularly, if we see the structure of the state, Myanmar, where actually many analysts argue that there is a nexus between state, insurgency, and drug. So it's a very exceptional country, and the country has also certain features. For example, I mean, it has 40% of territories which are known as frontier areas, which are basically areas where different tribal communities or different ethnic communities they live, and they have more than 32% minority population. It's one of the very few countries in the world where actually there is a real problem of political integration and political national political unity. And counterinsurgency, it is evidenced by many that Myanmar regime has spent more than 40% of government spending in counterterrorism or counterinsurgency work. And it has developed a thriving cross-border black market, drug, and the actors that we see in Myanmar, of course, Myanmar regime always remains an actor where the Tatmadaw, the Myanmar military is the all-powerful political institution. Buddhism is very, very important, and they have several insurgent groups, more than 100, political parties and national unity government, which was recently formed in the post-co period. But they have, the Myanmar state has fundamental issues like how they perceive power. I mean, they perceive power as a zero-sum game in the country, and they are also willing to and trying to see themselves as the regional powerhouse. So Myanmar has problems with their political integration, national unity. At the same time, they want to see as a regional power. So there is a contradiction, and we know how Tatmadaw pursued different military doctrines in the phase of 1950s when they focused more on foreign interference. But in the second phase, they focused on containing and eliminating insurgency and dealing with different ethnic groups who are fighting for their rights and their survival. And also in the phase 3, which came after 1988, after the election, and they actually declared 3 causes for their political structure or political kind of activity. Number 1 is the non-disintegration of national solidarity, the perpetuation of national sovereignty, and non-disintegration of the union. And we know about Buddhism as a religion which has become a kind of source of legitimacy in Myanmar for long, even today. And they have Sangha as a monkhood, as a strong institution who are actually very much aligned with the state. And you can see they still follow the slogans like Burma for the Burmans. To be Burman is to be Buddhist. And there are political parties which are related to the regimes, including NLD, which was kind of part of the government for some 10 years. But what is very disturbing that the Myanmar from the beginning has unleashed the brutal politics of sovereignty. In the name of sovereignty or national unity, what they wanted to do is they were trying to build a Burma Buddhist nation based on nationalism and ultranationalism, where they actually pinpointed to protect race and religion in the country. And for that, they are ready to do whatever they wanted. So they actually introduced the politics of discrimination and marginalization and the process of othering in Myanmar. And we know about very diversity in terms of ethnic groups. You can see from the map how different ethnic communities are located in Myanmar, particularly having the we have seen, and Myanmar is also going through insurgency and counterinsurgency wars, and there are 4 phases of this war, and stage or phase 1948 to 1962, and then stage 2 since 1962, when Myanmar had a military coup for the first time. Then stage 3 in 2015, and stage 4 currently what is happening in Myanmar. But this is very important. How actually Myanmar fought with different groups of people, not to mention about the Rohingyas, and what instruments they used and they are using. And this is particularly based on the fact-finding mission, which was actually constituted by UN Human Rights Council. And I have taken most of the evidence from their report, where actually we have seen that Myanmar has been focusing on certain instruments, certain ways which are actually contributing to torture, suppression, and repression of different groups of people, particularly different communities. So they target the civilians. They have the so-called 4 cards policy, under which they cut different non-state groups, particularly community groups, from access to food, finances, intelligence, and recruits from the local civilian population. There is widespread sexual violence. They have introduced, and they are continuing it with it, the exclusionary rhetoric, which is based on actually ultranationalism. They have also allowed impunity to all perpetrators, and all the perpetrators enjoy a complete kind of impunity, and so far there has not been any accountability of those perpetrators. And also we know from UN sources and also ICC, they are also committing genocide, crimes against humanity, and also war crimes. And here we see who are behind the genocide. And about the Rohingyas, this is very disturbing. We know, currently 1.1 million Rohingyas are living in Bangladesh, and they have a long history. But if we take the history of 1978, when they started the so-called Operation Dragon, King Dragon, and now they are actually in Operation Clearance. So through this process, Rohingyas have been displaced forcibly, and they took shelter in Bangladesh and other countries. and how actually Rohingyas, like other communities, have been the subject to the process of denying citizenship. They have been subject to introducing a national registration card. Myanmar regime has created model villages on the lands confiscated from Rohingya in the northern part of Rakhine state. They face travel restrictions, particularly since 2001. They have to face marriage permit. They have no right to employment automatically, since they are not citizens. They are also prohibited to certain categories of employment, like teaching in public school, public universities, and becoming doctors. And also, we know, they are subject to national verification cards. And in the last elections, 2020, they were also not allowed to vote. And they suffer from narratives in Myanmar, which has been created by both the regime and also the Buddhist extremists. If you see some of the slogans or some of the signboards in Myanmar, which are very common, Muslims are not allowed to stay overnight. Muslims are not allowed to buy or rent properties. No one is allowed to marry Muslims. If you try to feed the tiger, it will eat you. And if you give any space to color, who are known to the Myanmar Buddhist, Rohingyas as color, space to color, your country, race, and religion will be eliminated. So these are some of the examples of part of the narratives, xenophobic narratives that Myanmar regime has created, and they are actually still focusing this kind of things. And also to other major communities, the Shan, the Kachin, the Chin, the Karen, the Mon and Karenni, they are doing almost same thing. One of the statements from this fact-finding mission, the Tatmadaw soldiers do not treat us like humans. They treat us like animals. They look at us as though we shouldn't even exist. So almost similar types of instruments they have been using for decades, regardless of democracy or non-democracy. And in the case of external dynamics, I just want to draw your attention to Myanmar has borders with two major countries, China and India, and also Bangladesh and Thailand. So this is something which is very important for Myanmar, and Myanmar is now getting strength from their border relations particularly with India, China, and Thailand. And also to contextualize Myanmar's international relations, we know, Myanmar has very strong bilateral relations with some of the countries, and also regional and global. I'm just rushing because of time. So there is a growing engagement of great powers in Myanmar, which is very clear, and we all know about that. And what is their interest? What we have seen that in the case of Myanmar, for the external powers, particularly for the great powers, it is resources and geopolitics that actually surpass the norms and humanitarian appeal. As we see, Myanmar is actually a country of 1948 South Africa. Say white and non-white in South Africa segregated through the policy of apartheid. And Myanmar is precisely doing the same thing in this country since 1948. It's the South Africa of Southeast Asia. But this country has never faced such kind of scenario. Such kind of treatment that South Africa faced. And we see how geopolitical interest of different powers like China, India, or Japan. I think, let me conclude rather. So what I think Myanmar has been focusing on maximizing their power and self-reliance. They are enjoying geopolitical and geoeconomic advantages and pursuing the strategy also of non-alliance because it suits their purpose. And they have been continuing the use of violence and nationalism against minority communities. finally, what I think, given the domestic scenarios that we see even today and yesterday, and also there is no sign to end in future, so we need more support to the current national unity government and proactive role of regional powers in support of democracy, repatriation of the Rohingyas, and there is a key role of ASEAN. And what I emphasize, we should go beyond UN General Assembly resolutions. In 1962, the UN General Assembly resolution took, UN General Assembly took a resolution against South Africa by including the provision of imposing sanctions on South Africa. But here we see UN General Assembly is passing resolutions where actually we don't see this kind of provision. And also Security Council was also very active in the case of South Africa. So I think the UN should go beyond its General Assembly mandate, and UN Security Council should come forward. And I also finally want to see more consistent and effective role of the great powers to deal with, to me actually it is a civilizational crisis. It is not just crisis of the Rohingyas or some communities. It is a crisis of the civilization, and that has to be dealt from that way. And the internal and external dynamics of Myanmar clearly show that we have to focus on Myanmar's state, and that may help us to rethink our policies as a part of the global community. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for your thoughtful presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you that the program is going live on DBC News. And so now may I request our another dignified keynote speaker, Dr. Imtiaz Ahmed, Professor, Department of International Relations, University of Dhaka.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Honorable Foreign Minister, distinguished delegates, my co-panelists, and friends out there. What I will do is, get straight into what is to be done. I'm not sure whether the slides would be shown. I don't see the slides, so I'm a little bit confused. No slides. Okay, so bear me out. Normally, I have colorful slides, but somehow I think they thought of not using the slides. Anyway, my first slide, before I come to what is to be done, and I'll be very precise. One has to look into root causes of why we have a thing called Rohingya. And this is not the first time. We had the same thing in the 70s and the 90s. And they returned with little, exception. They returned, and then we have again in 2017. So if we want to look in the root causes, there are three. One is the issue of identity. We have to be very clear. The reason why it is not getting resolved is Myanmar is not recognizing the identity of the people. You call them Rohingyas or Arakanese Muslims. And some people are still, debating on that. But I just want to, make this very simple. That the debate is less now because at the ICJ, where even Aung San Suu Kyi was present, none of the members, including Aung San Suu Kyi, not for once mentioned that they are illegal Bangladeshis or Bengalis, etc., etc. The word they used was Arakanese Muslims. Arakan is not inside Bangladesh. If they're Arakanese Muslims, they have to return to Arakan. Simple as that. Now, slide is live. Thank you very much. The second one, we need to be very precise, is the 2008 Constitution as to why it is not happening. In the Constitution, and this is an interesting book by the grandson of the former Secretary General of the United Nations, U Thant, and I'm sure some of you would be knowing him very well. His grandson, Thant Minh Trieu, has written clearly that one of the stumbling blocks is that in the Constitution, you have this point that if a particular population constitutes 0.1% of the national population, which would be around 50,000 people, and if they live in 2 consecutive villages, which would be 100,000, they would have an autonomous zone. They will have autonomy automatically. There are people or there are races recognized by the Myanmar whose population is much less than Rohingyas. So it's not the issue of having a bigger population or all. Simply put, and Mintu argues that the reason why they are still hesitant is because of racism. And I'm sure some of you are now familiar that even Aung San Suu Kyi, when she was in the UK, also wrote some pieces very close to racism, absolutely arguing a racist understanding of Myanmar. So the constitution, and with that comes autonomy. So this is the problem. So we need to go back to the root causes, because unless there is an amendment to their constitution or bring up new bill or something, which would give some recognition, even if they use the word Arakanese Muslims, forget the word Rohingyas, that I think should take us to where we want, at least the international community wants them to be. Now, what is to be done to reach there? That's the issue. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina made it very clear back in 2017. Look at her 5 points, and you will see that they are very similar to Kofi Annan Commission's report and very similar to even, I would say, Chinese 3-point solution to the problem. And these are the 5 points I just want to reiterate so that people who have, probably forgotten what our Prime Minister said. Number 1, Myanmar must unconditionally stop the violence and the practice of ethnic cleansing in the Rakhine State immediately and forever. Number 2, Secretary General of the United Nations should immediately send a fact-finding mission to Myanmar. Third, all civilians, irrespective of religion and ethnicity, must be protected in Myanmar. And then, of course, there was the idea safe zones could be created inside Myanmar under UN supervision. Number 4, ensure a sustainable return of all forcibly displaced Rohingyas in Bangladesh to their homes in Myanmar. And the 5th one was the Kofi Annan Commission report recommendations must be immediately implemented unconditionally and in their entirety. So the way forward is very clear from Bangladesh standpoint, and I'm sure the Honorable Foreign Minister would be able to say more on this. Now, there are 5 things when it comes to what is to be done, 5 things I think, at least from my point of view, I think is important. The first thing is there are 3 major powers who are tilted toward Myanmar. Of course, China. Professor Delwar has already mentioned that. We also have Japan and India. Now, what I think they need to do is to decouple the Rohingya issue from their strategic interest. We understand that they have strategic interest. It's, as an IR person, I'm familiar with the strategic interest on the border, on the insurgency, particularly with India. I think Myanmar helped them to stop the insurgency. Not to mention, India would also require another route to the Bay of Bengal. We understand that. China would have the same thing in the southern borders. So what I think they should do, and the rest of the community, is to decouple the Rohingya issue from the strategic interest. Have your business interest, have your investments, but when it comes to Rohingya, you decouple it. And how do you do that? There are several ways of doing it. One is try using the word Rohingya to begin with. Neither India nor Japan uses even the word Rohingya. There has been a shift a little bit with Japan. This is for the first time they were co-sponsors of the General Assembly resolution. That, I think, is the first decoupling we see, particularly with Japan. We are yet to see that with India. I think this is important. Also, you can also decouple by engaging with the Rohingya diaspora or the Rohingya civil entity that is there all around the world. That itself will give message to Myanmar that things are changing. And there are many ways to decouple the Rohingya issue from the strategy interest. Number two, continue with the internationalizing the issue of justice. This is absolutely important. And as I say, the provisional verdict, people did not look at it carefully. It's unanimous, but then more importantly, the provisional verdict recognized the Rohingya identity. And that was the first time I think the Rohingyas got a recognition from a legal international body. So that, I think, is also important, and that needs to be flagged. And nowhere you have this issue of whether they're former Bengalis or whatever the common people in the streets of, Yangon or somewhere in Mandela, they talk about, some other concept. Probably they do. But the point, we need to see what is happening. So ICJ, ICC, and all of the international human rights needs to reactivate, and I think this is something even the media can also work. Now with the pandemic and the Zoom and Facebook and all other gadgets that we have, I think it's important to reactivate or re-energize the human rights activists all across the world, so that time and again you have an interaction on the issue of justice. Number three, reimposing the sanctions. Now, the argument I hear from time to time is that if you give sanctions, then the common people will be hurt. Now, I find that extraordinary, because there are countries in the world where you have sanctions. You have sanctions in Iran. You have sanctions against North Korea. Aren't there common people in Iran? Aren't there common people in North Korea? So I don't understand this particular argument, why we are using this word, common people would get hurt. The point here is that common people don't benefit from those investments anyway. Probably the common people would benefit if justice is done to a particular community, so that justice would be done to the common people. So to have a different understanding on the issue of justice and the issue of sanction on Myanmar really doesn't help. I think this is something that we need to work on seriously. The fourth one is engaging the Rohingya diaspora. There are 19 countries where we have Rohingyas. Well, Bangladesh has the most, but then there are other countries also with Rohingyas. It's a huge diaspora, and nobody is really investing on creating a civil entity out of the Rohingyas. Time and again we hear about ARSA. Why isn't the international community investing on the civil entity of creating an entity? That entity will then start bargaining and deciding the fate of the Rohingyas. Because at the end of the day, it's not an issue of Myanmar and Bangladesh. It's not an issue of, we are friends with Myanmar even today. We engage them, we trade with them. They are not our enemies. Myanmar is not our enemies at all. The issue is the problem with the Myanmar state and the Rohingya people, or the residents of, or citizens, if you want to say, of Rohingya. So it's not a Myanmar-Bangladesh issue. It's an issue between the people of Rohingya. So if that thing we have in mind, so I think it's important to look broadly beyond the Rohingyas who are residing in Bangladesh, look into the diaspora, and there are some active diaspora. And we have seen how one particular group are engaged with Argentina, where a case is there on the Rohingya. Look at it. And nobody is flagging the way it should be flagged. So my argument here is, it's important that the international community invest in the Rohingya diaspora, create a civil entity, and that civil entity will then take the burden of the people globally and engage at the end with the Myanmar government on how to resolve the issue. Finally, I think we have a window of opportunity. Now that there is no democracy, well, we had a pseudo-democracy, and I was quite surprised that the international community bought their pseudo-democracy. You know, 1/3 of the parliamentarians were incumbent military officers. Where do you have democracy on a platform like that? How could we even think that if you have 1/3 incumbent military officers and you call it democracy? And the sanctions were withdrawn. And now you know that, the Myanmar military must be laughing at the world. They look at this, they're more interested in money and business than anything else. So now we have an window opportunity, because after 1st February this year, there is no democracy in all sense of the word. Not that Myanmar had democracy in any way, but, now at least we know there is no democracy. But more importantly, more than 1,000 people died, were killed by the Myanmar military, and still we don't see sanctions. It doesn't get into my, just think of any other country doing it. Even the other day, we got bashed, or Bangladesh got bashed on something. Probably the Honorable Foreign Minister can also talk on that also a little bit. Just imagine, I'm referring to the extrajudicial killing and all. But here, 1,000 people got killed, and still business as usual. And only pointing out, okay, we are sanctioning some individuals. That doesn't help, because they don't have accounts there, they don't travel, they don't need to travel to those.